Mr. Akin, 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Akin, you unlimited time for the ranking member.
I'll try to take that in advisement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first question I have, I guess, is a really basic one. I asked it to another panel of witnesses, and they didn't really answer the question, so I thought I'd try it on you. And that is, particularly this was in light of the DDG situation, but is the purchasing strategy, which I just recently found out was pretty much dictated by Goldwater Nichols, where the Navy sets the requirements and then different people in acquisition basically work with a contractor to build something. Is that a good way overall to be acquiring ships? Or is that process mechanically somewhat structurally not as good as it should be? And I'm asking the question coming as an outsider, but many years ago working for IBM, and we used to manage projects. And one of the very single first rule is, if you've got a project that's a priority, you put one person in charge of it, and you put your finger near a belly button and say, look, here's the deal. You're going to have this much money, and this is what the product's going to have to look like, and we're going to hold you accountable for making that work. What I saw here on the DDG was there was this, it looked like somebody had shot a rudder out from under a ship and it was kind of wandering around. So my question to you is, structurally, is that process in need of repair? First question.
I'd like to respond first by making 2 points. First of all, my recollection is that when the Goldwater-Nichols legislation was passed, we had a handful of programs that had major cost overruns, schedule problems, or technical hurdles. Near as I can tell, they almost all do now. So I would have to conclude that if the purpose was to reform and make more efficient the acquisition process, it has failed. It certainly has managed to increase the number of parking spaces at the Pentagon, but whether it's increased the number of weapons systems or the efficiency with which they are fielded, I think is extremely doubtful. The second point I'd like to make is, I normally don't focus on Navy. I normally focus on aerospace and networks. What I have noticed, though, is that across all the warfighting communities and across all the services, we have a system where there are simply too many players. It starts at the requirements level and it ends up at the user level, but so many people at each stage in the process are participating in the concept of operations, the selection of the contractor, the definition of the operational requirements, that it's impossible to field anything that's cheap. It doesn't matter how simple the original concept is, whether it's boots or bullets, it's going to end up more expensive than if IBM had built it.
Excuse me, I made a little Freudian slip here. I was talking about LCS and not DDG. I'm sorry.
Well, I can be more specific on that. In the case of the littoral combat ship, what we have here is a very exciting idea, but it was an idea that was generated by the Navy under pressure from the Office of the Secretary of Defense to come up with neat ideas, then known as transformational ideas. It may be a real breakthrough in naval warfare, but the way they tried to do it, the business plan, the going to the second tier yards, the definition of all sorts of capabilities not previously resident on frigates or other small warships, guarantee there would be problems. Now, I actually think the program's not going that badly. But let's face it, it's not going to come in at $220 million a copy. And I think the larger problem, which nobody has focused on yet, is that this is still a neat idea. We don't know how it's going to do out in the Indian Ocean with 4 crews for every 3 ships, with 40-knot fuel costs, and all those other things that are associated, like the modular mission packages. The jury is still out on whether the concept will work. The boats aren't bad for what we're trying to do, but whether they actually fit in well with our naval force structure and concept of operations, we won't know that for a while.
2. First of all, the thesis of your question compares IBM to the defense system, and for the very reason you pointed out. The direct answer to your question is the system that we have is lousy, and it has not worked very well, though well intended. And the reason that it can't work very well is because there are too many cooks. And therein we're back to acquisition reform, and I know you don't want to spend the morning on this question, but the reason that it doesn't work is not only because there are too many players, but because we are always trying to accomplish so many things at the same time. You will recall that Goldwater Nichols was not terribly well received by the military services. We have since learned our manners, as well as learned all of the good things that came from that rationale. But when we were back in the process that we're in right now, the military kind of shut itself out of the debate and had to live with the results without being able to influence them. And every time you add somebody, even if it's somebody who is terribly well respected, who can play with the, in this case, the requirements process, you're bound to be going in the wrong direction. One of the points that Dr. Thompson made that is particularly important to remember is, as I said in my statement, there's lots of blame to go around about LCS, and that's a process that you all have probably spent a lot of time on already. But one of the things that was central to all of that is that the Navy saw that they had to do something. And so they went ahead and did something rather than determining what needed to be done and coming to you and to all of the other people in the process with an answer. So it kind of stunk, and it began there, and it just kept on going and unraveling. And it has not helped with more people. So I'm back to the same thing. The direct answer to your question is it is not helpful, and it is not good, although the intentions were honorable and indeed have probably given us many benefits.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, because I'm of the opinion that you could take good people and put them in a bad system and you get bad results. And that can happen very easily. That's why I'm asking the very specific question about the structure of how we approach this. And I don't think we should zing people for being future thinking and saying, let's get moving and let's drive this process more rapidly. But we have to know how we're doing that. But thank you. I was going to